I said only insecure men want monogamy. Now he's sleeping with someone else, and I can't even be mad. Okay, so this is absolutely wild, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. I literally can't even be mad because this is technically what I asked for. I'm Macy, 32, and I've spent the last 5 years of my life confidently telling everyone, especially my husband, that monogamy is for the birds, or more specifically, for insecure men who can't handle their partners having freedom. And now, well, let's just say the universe decided to call my bluff in the most brutal way possible. I met Vince at Bookmark Cafe, where I work as a barista while trying to finish my novel. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork, always ordering the same thing, an Americano with room for cream. I noticed him right away because, unlike most customers who barely looked up from their phones, he actually made eye contact and said thank you. Plus, he was gorgeous in this understated way, tall, with deep brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. After 2 weeks of him coming in, I finally wrote my number on his cup with a stupid little note. We went out that weekend, and it was like we'd known each other forever. He worked at this financial advisory firm downtown, nothing flashy, just steady. He listened when I talked about my writing and actually asked questions about my characters like they were real people. We dated for 2 years before getting married in a small ceremony at his parents' lake house. Even back then, I was vocal about my views on relationships. I'd gone through a feminist awakening in college and had all these big ideas about how traditional marriage was a patriarchal trap. I read books about ethical non-monogamy and relationship anarchy, and I truly believed jealousy was just insecurity in disguise. I'd tell Vince, and anyone who'd listen, that only insecure men want monogamy, and real love means wanting your partner to experience everything life has to offer. Looking back, I can see how Vince would get this little crease between his eyebrows whenever I'd go on one of my rants, but he never argued. He'd just nod and say something like, "That's an interesting perspective, Mace." I took his silence as agreement, or at least as him coming around to my obviously more evolved way of thinking. We moved into a cute little apartment in Oakwood Heights after the wedding. Nothing special, just a one-bedroom with terrible water pressure and neighbors who fought at 3 a.m., but it was ours. We kept separate friend groups, mine from the cafe and writing workshops, his from work and his weekly basketball game. We had our own hobbies and interests, which I thought was so healthy. My friends thought we were the perfect couple. Bree would always say, "God, you guys have it figured out." Tyler won't even let me go to the store without calling to check in, and I'd smile this smug little smile, feeling so evolved and enlightened. I truly believed Vince, and I had cracked the code to a happy marriage, independence with just enough togetherness. For 3 years, everything seemed perfect. I kept working at the cafe, picking up extra shifts to save for a writing retreat. Vince got a small promotion at work. We took weekend trips to the coast, binged shows together, and had inside jokes that made us laugh until we couldn't breathe. But underneath it all, I was starting to feel restless, like there was more out there I was missing. If I'd been paying attention, I might have noticed that Vince was happy with exactly what we had. He didn't seem restless or confined, he seemed content. But I was too busy theorizing about relationships to see the one I was in, and that blindness, my absolute confidence in my own enlightened views, was about to blow up everything we had built. It started at Shannon's housewarming party. She'd finally moved out of her parents' place and invited basically everyone she knew to see the tiny studio apartment she was so proud of. I was grabbing another drink when I spotted him, Julian. We'd had a few classes together in college, but hadn't kept in touch. He'd gotten even better looking, with a new confidence that made my stomach flip. "Macy Turner, no way," he said, pulling me into a hug that lasted a second too long. "How the heck have you been? Are you still writing that sci-fi novel?" The fact that he remembered knocked me sideways. We ended up talking in the corner for over an hour, completely ignoring everyone else. He was working as a graphic designer, freelancing for cool indie brands. Nothing happened, no kissing, not even hand-holding, but there was an electricity I hadn't felt since the early days with Vince. The texting started the next day, casual at first, links to writing articles, funny caffeine memes. It quickly became daily. We started meeting for coffee during my breaks. Again, nothing physical happened, But there was an undeniable spark, this what if hovering between us. That's when the idea really took root. Why shouldn't I explore this connection? Monogamy was a social construct, right? I'd been saying that for years. Maybe it was time to practice what I preached. The hard part was figuring out how to bring it up with Vince. I waited for the perfect moment, a Saturday morning when we were both relaxed, coffee in hand, sun streaming through our kitchen window. "Babe, I've been thinking about something," I started, trying to sound casual. "You know my views on relationships and how I think monogamy is kind of an outdated concept." Vince lowered his mug, that familiar crease appearing. "What's this about, Mace?" "I've been reading more about ethical non-monogamy and it makes so much sense. People aren't meant to get everything from just one person." His face tightened in a subtle way. "Are you attracted to someone else?" I waved my hand. "That's not what this is about. It's about freedom and honesty. Don't you think there's something beautiful about loving someone enough to let them be completely free?" "I didn't mention Julian, not yet." "I thought we were happy," he said quietly. "We are." "This isn't about happiness, it's about growth, about not limiting each other," I insisted, taking his hand. "Only insecure men want monogamy, Vince. You're not insecure, are you?" Low blow. I knew it even as the words left my mouth. He pulled his hand away and stood, taking his mug to the sink, his shoulders tense. "I need to think about this." Over the next few weeks, I continued my campaign. I left articles about polyamory on the coffee table, brought it up casually in conversation, while texting Julian more often and meeting him for longer coffee dates where our knees touched under the table. Vince grew quieter, more withdrawn, but I interpreted it as contemplation rather than hurt. I told myself he was processing, evolving. In reality, he was retreating. Finally, after nearly a month of persistent nudging, Vince agreed. We were lying in bed, the room dark except for streetlight filtering through the blinds. "Okay," he said, voice flat. "If this is what you want, let's try it." "Really?" I propped myself up, surprised by the capitulation. "Yeah, you're right, maybe I am being insecure." The way he said it made my stomach twist, but I pushed the feeling away. "We'll have boundaries, of course," I rushed to add. "Complete honesty, safe sex, our relationship comes first." He nodded, eyes on the ceiling. "Whatever you say, Mace." I was too excited to notice the resignation in his voice. I fell asleep planning my first real date with Julian, while next to me Vince lay awake until dawn. The arrangement began almost immediately. I told Julian that Vince and I had opened our relationship. His response was enthusiastic, though he asked several times if Vince was truly okay with it. I assured him everything was above board. We scheduled our first official date for Friday dinner at a trendy downtown spot. I spent hours getting ready. When I finally emerged, Vince was on the couch scrolling his phone. He looked up and, for a brief moment, something flashed across his face, pain, maybe, or resignation. "You look nice," he said neutrally. "Thanks," I replied, suddenly awkward. "I won't be late. Probably home by 11. He nodded, already looking back at his phone. "Have a good time." That first date with Julian was everything I'd imagined. Conversation flowed, the attraction was palpable. For the first time in years, I felt that flutter of something new. We ended the night with a breathless kiss. I floated home on a cloud of validation. The apartment was dark. Vince had gone to bed or was pretending to. I slipped in beside him, a careful distance between our bodies. In the morning, he didn't ask about my date, and I didn't offer details. It was the first of many silences that would grow between us. I saw Julian regularly. We went from dinner dates to entire afternoons together, from kissing to much more, while Vince became increasingly absent, physically and emotionally. He started working late, hitting the gym more, keeping his responses brief and non-committal. I was too caught up in the novelty to notice or care. About a month into the arrangement, I casually mentioned to Vince that he, too, could see other people if he wanted. "That's the whole point of an open relationship, right?" I said, stirring pasta sauce. "You're free too." He looked up, expression unreadable. "Right. Thanks for the reminder. Have you thought about it at all?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not really." "Well, the option's there," I chirped, turning back to the stove. "I didn't mean it," Not really. I liked the idea of Vince waiting at home while I explored. The power dynamic felt good, me evolving, him standing still. I never considered he might take me up on it. That evening, I noticed him texting more than usual, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. A tiny seed of unease planted itself, but I dismissed it. Vince wasn't the type to actually see someone else. He was too traditional. Too steady. Wasn't he? As weeks turned into months, something shifted. The initial excitement with Julian began to fade. Our once deep conversations felt repetitive. Meanwhile, Vince had changed in subtle ways. He seemed more self-contained. He no longer asked about my day or my writing. When I came home from dates, he didn't seem to care, no jealousy, no questions, just a polite nod and good night. New clothes appeared in his closet. A different cologne. More attention to his appearance. His phone buzzed with texts that made him smile in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Paying our cell bill one night, I noticed a number appearing dozens of times on Vince's logs, far more frequent than any other contact. A number I didn't recognize. The next morning over breakfast, I mentioned it casually. Hey, noticed you've been texting someone a lot, number ending in 4382. Vince glanced up from his toast, expression neutral. Oh, that's Amber. She's helping me with the Henderson account at work. Seems like a lot of texts for work, I said lightly. He shrugged. She's thorough. We've been putting in extra hours on this one. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten, the way he said her name, with familiarity. What could I say? I was literally spending multiple evenings a week with another man. I had no ground to stand on. Still, unease grew as I paid more attention, late nights, vague weekends at the gym, returning with no shopping bags, and the way he no longer reached for me in bed. Meanwhile, my relationship with Julian had plateaued. I found myself thinking about Vince during dates, wondering what he was doing and with whom. I suggested a weekend getaway to reconnect. I can't that weekend, he said, not looking up from his phone. I've got plans. What plans? I asked, trying not to sound desperate. Just plans, Mace. Things I need to take care of. The vagueness finally pushed me over the edge. After 3 months of open, I realized I had no idea what my husband did with his time anymore. We lived like polite roommates. It was eating me alive. I decided to surprise him at work for lunch. I picked up sandwiches from his favorite deli and headed downtown. As I approached the entrance, I saw him coming out with a woman. She was stunning, tall, willowy, honey blonde hair, a laugh that carried across the plaza. What knocked the wind out of me wasn't her appearance, it was the way Vince looked at her. Warmth, attention, adoration. The way he used to look at me. I stood frozen as they walked to a restaurant, his hand casually on the small of her back. Through the window, I watched them sit, lean in, lace fingers. Then, as casually as breathing, she kissed him, a quick, familiar gesture that spoke of established intimacy. My vision blurred. The bag of sandwiches felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I turned and walked back to my car in a daze, drove home on autopilot, and sat on our couch staring at nothing until I heard his key in the lock hours later. Hey, he said, surprised to see me. Everything okay? Who's Amber? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He paused, expression shifting from surprise to guarded. I told you, she's a coworker. Is that all she is? Silence stretched. Finally, he sighed and Saturday, no, he said simply. That's not all she is. How long? A few months. Since about a week after you started seeing Julian. The revelation hit like a blow. You've been seeing her this whole time and you never told me? He looked at me then, really looked. You wanted an open relationship. You said only insecure men want monogamy. What was I supposed to do with that, Macy? I don't know, maybe talk to me? Tell me you were actually acting on it. Why? You never gave me details about Julian. That's different, I said, hearing the hypocrisy even as I said it. How? He asked, gentle but firm. How is it different? I had no answer. I'd wanted freedom without consequences. I'd wanted Vince to remain faithfully mine while I explored. I'd never considered what it would mean for him to do the same. Are you in love with her? The question escaped before I could stop it. Vince looked down at his hands. I don't know if it's love yet, but she makes me feel valued. Wanted. She doesn't make me feel insecure for wanting a committed relationship. Each word was a knife, not because they were cruel, he wasn't, but because they were true. I had made him feel insecure. I'd belittled his desire for monogamy as old-fashioned and regressive. Now someone else affirmed what I dismissed. So what happens now? I asked, tears finally spilling. I don't know, he said honestly. But I can't keep living like this, Mace, pretending I'm okay with an arrangement I never really wanted. We talked long into the night, really talked for the first time in months. Vince admitted he'd only agreed to open things because he felt cornered, like he had to choose between being insecure or losing me. I admitted my desire for an open relationship was less about philosophy and more about wanting novelty without consequences. But some truths, once spoken, can't be taken back. In the weeks that followed, we tried to find our way back. I ended things with Julian. Vince promised to be more open about his feelings. We went to therapy, together and separately. But the distance remained. Vince continued seeing Amber, now with my knowledge. He came home from dates with her with a lightness I couldn't remember seeing in years. Meanwhile, I found myself alone with my thoughts, confronting uncomfortable truths about who I was and what I really wanted. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening nearly 6 months after we'd opened. Vince sat across from me at our kitchen table, serious but calm. Macy, I need to tell you something. I've been doing a lot of thinking and I've realized something important. I want monogamy. I've always wanted it. Not because I'm insecure, but because that's how I'm built. That's what makes me feel safe and connected. I nodded, tears threatening. And Amber wants that too. Yes, he said quietly. She does. And I'm the one who doesn't, I finished, the irony not lost on me. He reached to take my hand. I think maybe you do want it, Mace, but you've spent so long convincing yourself otherwise that you can't admit it. I pulled my hand away, suddenly angry. Don't tell me what I want. Okay, he said, leaning back. Then tell me, what do you want? The question hung between us, simple, impossible. The truth was I didn't know anymore. I'd spent years building an identity as the progressive, evolved partner beyond jealousy and possessiveness. But faced with the reality of Vince connecting deeply with someone else, all my theories crumbled. I want things to go back to how they were, I finally said, my voice small. Vince's expression was gentle but resolute. We can't go back, Macy. Too much has changed. I've changed. A week later, he packed his suitcase, just the essentials. He said he needed space to figure things out. We both knew what that meant, even if we didn't say it. He was moving in with Amber, at least temporarily, testing a relationship built on shared values rather than my ideals. As I watched him pack, a bitter realization settled over me. I couldn't even be mad at him. Not really. This was exactly what I had advocated for: freedom to follow your heart, to pursue connections without the constraints of traditional monogamy. Vince was simply taking my philosophy and living it to its logical conclusion. He paused at the door, suitcase in hand. I do love you, Macy. I always will. But love isn't enough if we want fundamentally different things. Do we? I asked desperately, clinging to the possibility this was all a misunderstanding. He gave me a sad smile. I think we might have wanted the same things all along. We just couldn't admit it, to ourselves or each other. After he left, I sat alone in our apartment, my apartment now, I supposed, and tried to make sense of everything. How had my confident theories about relationships led me here, alone and heartbroken? How had I failed to see that what I really wanted wasn't freedom from commitment, but the security of knowing Vince was committed to me while I explored elsewhere? The truth was humbling. For all my talk about evolved relationships and freedom from jealousy, I was just as possessive, just as traditional in my desires as anyone else. I'd wanted to keep Vince safely wrapped up in our marriage while I experienced the thrill of something new. When he did exactly the same, it broke me. I couldn't even be mad at him. That was the worst part. He'd simply taken me at my word, followed the path I insisted was enlightened, and in doing so found someone who valued what he had to offer: his loyalty, his desire for monogamy, his traditional heart. Scrolling through old photos, Vince and me in happier times, I wondered how I'd gotten it so wrong, how I'd mistaken his quietness for agreement, his patience for evolution, How I'd been so convinced of my own rightness I couldn't see the harm I was causing. One photo made me pause, our wedding day, my mascara-smeared face beaming up at him, his eyes crinkled with that smile he reserved just for me. We'd been so happy then, so certain, before I decided certainty was boring, that happiness needed enhancement. I set the phone down and wiped my eyes. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. I thought about texting Julian but knew that would only be running from the truth again. Instead, I opened my laptop and started writing not my novel, but the story of us. Of how I'd been so focused on what I thought I should want that I destroyed what I actually had. Maybe someday Vince would read it. Maybe someday we'd find our way back to each other, older and wiser. Or maybe not. Maybe some lessons come too late, and the price of learning them is losing what mattered most. All I knew for certain was that I couldn't even be mad, not at Vince, not at Amber, not at anyone but myself. I'd said only insecure men want monogamy. Turns out what I really meant was that only insecure women need to test their partner's love by seeing how much freedom they'll tolerate. And in the process of discovering that truth, I lost the one person who loved me enough to let me learn it my way, even when it meant losing him.